My family gave everything to my sister and left me out. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. The will leaves the house, the business, and all savings to Melissa. Evan receives no inheritance. That's exactly how the lawyer read it. No softening, no pause, just my name attached to nothing. I sat there between my parents on the leather chairs, suddenly aware that even the pen in my hand was borrowed. Melissa lounged beside them like a queen in ripped jeans, already half smiling at her phone. I'm 29, an office admin at a logistics company. I track shipments, answer calls, calm angry drivers, and juggle numbers that never belonged to me. It's not glamorous, but it's honest. Every bill I've paid, every dented car I've kept alive, came from my own overtime and missed lunches. Evan understands, Mom added quickly, glancing toward me like a stage cue. He's always been independent. Your sister, she needs security. Needs security. Melissa, who hadn't kept a job longer than 6 months, needed security. I, apparently, needed a character-building experience. The lawyer, Harris, cleared his throat. I just want to confirm you've all reviewed these documents before today. Dad folded his hands over his belly, eyes drifting anywhere but toward me. We've discussed it as a family, he said. We're just formalizing what everyone already knows. I didn't know. I thought taking care of the paperwork meant something roughly fair. I thought, we'll make sure you're okay too, wasn't code for absolutely nothing. My mouth went dry. So, I get nothing? I finally asked, hearing my voice wobble like a kid's. No one rushed to correct me. Melissa tapped her nails on the table, counting my invisibility like loose change. Mom stared at the carpet, as if fairness might appear in the pattern if she avoided my eyes long enough. Harris shuffled papers that already felt like a verdict. I swallowed hard, feeling every year I'd spent being the responsible one dissolve into background noise around their satisfied faces. I had no idea this was only their first betrayal. People act like favoritism is a switch someone flips one day, but in our house, it was more like a dimmer slowly turning toward Melissa until the rest of us were shadows. When we were kids, birthdays were the easiest place to see it. Melissa got themed parties, bounce houses, a hired Elsa once. I got store-bought cupcakes and a maybe next year, bud, when I asked if I could invite more than 2 friends. Mom said girls just cared more about birthdays. Melissa is sensitive, she'd whisper, icing another princess cake. You're tough, Evan. You understand. I understood when Melissa crashed Dad's car at 18, he called it an accident and bought her a safer one. When I dented the truck backing out of the cluttered driveway, it was careless and came with a lecture about responsibility and paying for repairs out of my weekend job. Uncle Ray tried to balance things. He'd slip me $20 at Christmas with a quiet, "This one's just for you, kiddo." But even his efforts felt like band-aids over something structural, like the house itself had been built with my room facing north. The fresh wound came 3 months before the will. I'd spent weeks helping Dad with the bookkeeping for the small rental property he managed. Late nights, sorting receipts, fixing his spreadsheet formulas, explaining why rent checks didn't match deposits. At dinner, Melissa breezed in late, dumped her purse on the table, and announced, "So, I quit the salon. I'm going to help with the property full-time." Dad lit up. That's my girl. Finally thinking long-term. He didn't mention the hours I'd just saved him in late fees and penalties. Instead, he clapped Melissa on the shoulder and joked, "Evan's good with numbers, but your sister's got the charm we need." That night, I washed dishes alone while they planned their future down the hall, and something sour settled in my throat. I didn't realize those conversations were already rehearsing the speech that would erase me entirely. After the will meeting, my brain kept rewinding, trying to find the first hint that this was coming. It wasn't hard. The flags had been waving for months. I just called them paperwork. One Saturday, I dropped by the house to return Dad's drill. The dining table, usually buried in mail and half-finished puzzles, was covered in neat stacks of folders. Melissa sat there with a glass of wine and a pen that looked far too expensive. "Wow," I said, setting the drill down carefully. "You starting a law firm or something?" She flashed a little smirk. "Just helping Dad with some documents. You wouldn't like this stuff. Boring adult things." I opened my mouth to remind her I'd been paying my own rent since 22, then shut it. Dad appeared from the kitchen, clapped my shoulder, and steered me away from the table like it was radioactive. "We're just simplifying things," he said. Getting the properties and accounts tidy. You don't have to worry about that. I kind of like to know what I don't have to worry about. I joked, trying to keep my tone light. Dad's smile didn't reach his eyes. You've got your own life, son. Let us handle this. A week later, a letter arrived at my apartment with my parents' address in the top corner and the name of a bank I didn't use. Inside was a notice about recent changes to joint account structures. My name wasn't mentioned anywhere, but a sticky note on the envelope read, in Mom's handwriting, "Oops, wrong address. Meant for Melissa." I stared at the letter a long time before dropping it in the outgoing mail. I remember turning the envelope over in my hands, feeling the cheap paper go soft at the edges while a voice in my head whispered that none of this was normal. But another, louder voice, the one my parents had trained, said, "Don't make trouble. Don't be dramatic. They know what they're doing." That should have been the moment I pressed harder, but I told myself families made weird choices sometimes. I didn't understand those boring adult things were steps toward erasing me. The day of the announcement started stupidly normal. My biggest worry that morning was whether my car would survive another winter, not whether my family considered me disposable. Mom texted at 8, family meeting at the house at 6. Just paperwork stuff. Please be on time. I assumed it was about Dad's blood pressure meds, or maybe the rental property I'd been helping with. I even thought, for a second, that they might finally acknowledge how much I'd done behind the scenes. Delusional, in hindsight. When I walked in that evening, the living room had been rearranged like a low-budget courtroom. Dad's recliner faced the couch directly. Melissa had claimed the corner like it was a throne. A man I'd never met before sat in an armchair, briefcase at his feet. "Evan," Mom said too brightly. "This is Mr. Harris, our attorney." "Nice to meet you," he said, standing halfway, extending his hand. "We're just going over your parents' estate plan. Routine stuff." My stomach dipped. "Estate plan? Are you guys okay?" "We're fine," Dad said, waving it off. "It's just time to get things formalized. We've talked about this." No, we had not. Harris opened the folder, flipped to the top page, and began reading. It sounded clinical, detached, like an audio book about other people's lives. When he reached the line about the entirety of the primary residence, savings accounts, and business interests to be left to Melissa Carter, my name showed up only in a sentence about no further obligations to their son, Evan Carter. I watched the words hang in the air, waiting for someone to laugh and say it was phrased wrong. That, of course, there was something set aside for me, too. Instead, Dad leaned back and said, "This way, there's no confusion later. It keeps things simple." My mind did frantic math, converting childhood sleepovers, rushed airport pickups, and every holiday I'd worked through so Melissa could travel into some imaginary spreadsheet where effort equaled worth. The numbers didn't matter here. The only thing that counted was who they chose to protect. My world tilted as everyone waited to see whether I'd smile and nod or finally explode. I didn't explode. Not at first. I laughed. A short, ugly sound that made Harris glance up sharply. "So this is a joke," I said. "Right?" Mom reached for my hand. "Honey, please don't make this harder than it has to be." "Harder than what?" My fingers slipped out of hers. "Harder than finding out I'm the practice child and Melissa's the real one." "Come on," Melissa snapped. "Don't be dramatic. You're fine on your own. I'm the one taking over the house and the rental." "That's work, Evan." "Work?" I repeated. "Like the bookkeeping I've been doing for free?" Dad's jaw tightened. "That's enough. We don't owe you a payout for being a decent son. We're not dead yet. This is just planning." "It's erasing," I said, voice shaking. "You're planning my erasure." The room went silent. Harris cleared his throat again. Like maybe if he spoke, we'd all remember there was a script we were supposed to follow. "I can step out," he offered. "No," Dad said. "We're done here. Evan's upset. He'll cool off." He stood, which in our house was the signal that a conversation was over. Melissa immediately pivoted to logistics, asking something about the property taxes. Mom followed them down the hall, murmuring, already smoothing ruffled feathers that weren't mine. I walked out without saying goodbye. No one called after me. The front door clicked shut like the end of a chapter one hadn't agreed to finish. In the car, my chest finally cracked open. I sat in the dark driveway, fists pressed to my eyes, letting years of swallowed comments and jokes, and "you're so responsible" dissolve into something hot and bitter. My phone buzzed with a message from a coworker asking if I could cover a shift, and I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. I wiped my face on my sleeve, put the car in drive, and left the house that apparently had never been mine. The family group chat sat empty on my screen, our last messages weeks old memes and reminders about mom's lasagna night. No new notifications, no missed calls, just a blank space where an apology should have been. The next morning, I discovered there were ways to be disowned without anyone saying the word. For a little while, I tried to do what Dad predicted, cool off. I went to work, filed invoices, listened to podcasts about people whose families were messier than mine. I told myself this was just another example of them favoring Melissa, not some grand conspiracy. Then the envelope showed up. It was a Thursday night. I came home to my cramped apartment, kicked off my shoes, and grabbed the small stack of mail the landlord left on the radiator. Electric bill, junk coupons, and one stiff white envelope from Ridgeview Community Bank. I frowned. That was my parents' bank, not mine. Inside was a courtesy notice about an overdue payment on a home equity line of credit attached to the property on Willow Lane, our rental. The letter was addressed to Daniel and Melissa Carter. My name wasn't printed anywhere, but my address was in the window like I'd asked to be part of this conversation. At the bottom, in tiny print, it mentioned prior joint guarantor, Evan Carter, with a handwritten note next to it that had been crossed out so aggressively the paper tore. My hands went cold. I called Mom immediately. She didn't answer. 2 minutes later, a text popped up. Can't talk. Everything is fine. Please don't worry about paperwork stuff. Paperwork again. I took photos of the letter before sliding it back into the envelope. Something about the scratchy black ink over my name made my stomach twist. The next day at lunch, I pulled my free credit report at my desk, half expecting it to be blank drama. It wasn't. There, buried in the accounts section, was a closed inquiry from Ridgeview 6 months ago with a note I had never seen. Consumer removed as joint applicant per updated documentation. I leaned back in my squeaky office chair, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and stared at the screen until my vision blurred. For years, I'd believed my job was to be easy, to not add problems, to be the son who required the least maintenance. That was the moment suspicion finally pushed past my trained obedience. Once you start pulling one thread, you notice how many others are fraying. I printed the credit report and the Ridgeview letter that night, spreading them across my tiny kitchen table like a crime board. My cat, Milo, hopped up to investigate, then wisely retreated to the counter. The first stop was Ridgeview itself. I took an early lunch, drove over in my rattling Honda, and walked into a lobby that smelled like coffee and old carpet cleaner. A woman with perfect eyeliner greeted me at the desk. "Hi," I said, holding up the letter. "I think there's been some kind of mistake with an account involving my parents and, apparently, me." She glanced at the notice, then typed something into her computer. "You're Evan Carter?" "Yeah." Her eyes flicked to the screen, then back to me with a sympathetic tilt. "I'm limited in what I can share, but it looks like you were previously listed as a co-applicant on a home equity line. That status was changed 6 months ago with signed documentation." "Signed by who?" I asked. "By the primary borrowers and the joint applicant," she said carefully. I felt like the floor shifted. "Right. Okay. Thanks." Back in the car, I called Uncle Ray. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey, kiddo. Everything all right? You sound like you swallowed a bee." "I think Mom and Dad took my name off a loan I didn't know I was on," I said. "And they're acting like it's no big deal." There was a long pause on the line. "Come by tonight," he said finally. "Bring whatever you've got." That evening, his kitchen table became my second crime board. He squinted at the printouts, jaw tightening. "Your dad mentioned refinancing," Ray said slowly. "He never said you were involved, or that you weren't anymore." Ray dug through an old shoebox on top of his fridge and pulled out a crumpled carbon copy of the original rental agreement from years ago, my name scribbled next to Dad's in blue ink. He tapped the paper like it was a smoking gun. "You were part of this once, whether they admit it now or not," he muttered. The more we talked, the more dates and decisions started lining up in ugly little rows. The mini twist came not from a bank or a lawyer, but from an email Melissa wasn't smart enough to delete. I still had access to the old family email address we'd all used years ago for streaming passwords and shared bills. No one had bothered to change the login. Out of habit more than anything, I tried it one night. There, in this sent folder, was a thread titled Property Transfer, Willow Lane. It was from 6 months ago, Around the time the bank said my status changed. I clicked. Hi Daniel and Melissa. Wrote a paralegal from a local title company. Attached is the deed transfer reflecting the sale of 123 Willow Lane from Daniel and Linda Carter to Melissa Carter for the agreed consideration of $10. $10. The attachment showed my parents' shaky signatures, Melissa's bubble letters, and a line where any prior interest held or claimed by Evan Carter is hereby released and extinguished. Next to that was a looping signature that looked disturbingly like mine. I hadn't signed anything. I zoomed in until the pixels blurred. It was my name, my general handwriting style, but the flourish on the E was wrong. My stomach turned. Ray, I said on speaker, voice thin. They sold the rental to Melissa for $10, and there's a signature that's supposed to be mine. Send it to me, he said immediately. A minute later, he whistled through the phone. That's not a sale, that's a shuffle. And that signature. I've seen you sign things since you were 10, kiddo. He didn't have to finish the sentence. I could hear what he was thinking, what I was thinking, what any reasonable person would think looking at that scanned document. Images flashed through my head. Dad guiding my hand when I learned to write my name. Mom bragging about how neat my signature was on school forms. Melissa rolling her eyes whenever there was actual paperwork involved. Someone had taken all of that history and turned it into a prop on a PDF. For the first time, the favoritism didn't just feel cruel. It felt dangerously close to criminal. I didn't sleep much after the email discovery. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that fake version of my name staring back at me like a stranger wearing my face. Ray was the one who said the word out loud. Forgery, he muttered, flipping through the printouts again. Or at least enough to make a lawyer nervous. I don't want to sue my parents, I said. I don't want to be erased. Those aren't mutually exclusive, he replied. But you're not doing anything without backup. So I started building a file. I saved the Ridgeview notice, the credit report, the email thread, the deed transfer, screenshots of old messages where Dad called Willow Lane, your inheritance, one day. I dug through my own drawers and found a copy of the first lease agreement I'd signed as a teenager to help with the property, my real signature, a neat comparison sample. At work, between calls, I researched estate disputes and forgery cases until my brain buzzed. Legal blogs talked about undue influence and breach of fiduciary duty in calm, tidy paragraphs, like they weren't describing the people who'd taught me to ride a bike. The hardest part was deciding what I wanted. If I confronted them alone, they'd minimize it, tell me I was overreacting, maybe threaten to cut me off emotionally in ways that would still somehow be my fault. If I went straight to a lawyer, there was no going back from that line. One night, I stared at the folder on my laptop labeled Carter Evidence and felt like I was choosing between two versions of myself. The good son who swallowed injustice or the adult who finally protected his own future. I rehearsed conversations in the shower, in the car, whispering potential lines like prayers. Every version ended with them calling me ungrateful, greedy, dramatic. None of them ended with them saying, "We're sorry. We'll fix this." In the end, I emailed Harris, the family lawyer, asking for a private appointment to clarify some questions about recently executed estate documents. I had no idea that email would light the fuse on everything. Harris's office was colder than I remembered, all gray walls and framed diplomas. He offered me water, glanced at the bulging folder in my hands, and said, "I understand you have some concerns, Evan." That's one word for it. I replied, sitting down. We went through everything. The Ridgeview notice, the credit report entry, the deed transfer for $10, the near miss of my signature. Harris read in silence, lips pressed into a thin line. "Did you witness me signing anything for this transfer?" I asked. He shook his head. "No. When your parents brought in the documents, they were already signed." "By me," I said. "By a signature purporting to be yours," he corrected. "I'm not a handwriting expert, but I will say this raises serious ethical concerns." Ethical concerns. Lawyer for this is bad. So what do? I asked. I don't want to drag my family through court, but I also don't want to pretend this never happened. Harris leaned back. "You're entitled to copies of any documents that reference you or your supposed consent. I can request them formally. And if you choose, we can arrange a meeting with your parents and Melissa to address these discrepancies." "A meeting here?" I said. He nodded. "Neutral ground. No one can say words were twisted later." On my way out, My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. Family dinner Sunday? Melissa wants to celebrate finalizing everything. Please come, it would mean a lot. I almost declined. Then I pictured Harris's folder on his desk, my parents' signatures neatly lined up next to a stranger wearing my name. The idea made my skin crawl, but Ray agreed it was smart. Let them talk, he said over the phone. People who think they've gotten away with something love to brag around a table. Listen carefully. Don't tip your hand. I wrote his words on a sticky note and stuck it to my dashboard like a mission briefing. I rehearsed my neutral face in the rearview mirror. I decided to go to dinner and pretend I knew nothing at all. Dinner at my parents' house felt like stepping onto a stage where everyone had rehearsed their lines except me. The table was set with the good plates we only used on holidays. Melissa had a champagne bottle chilling in a silver bucket like she'd just closed on a skyscraper instead of a house she bought for $10. Evan, Mom said, air kissing my cheek. I'm so glad you came. Wouldn't miss it, I lied, sitting at my old spot. Melissa raised her glass. To new beginnings, she said. To finally having things official. Dad nodded, eyes flicking toward me. To the future. And to both our kids building their own paths. Both our kids. Interesting way to toast after legally choosing one. I pushed my food around my plate while they talked about renovations, tenants, Melissa's plans to modernize the rental. Every time I opened my mouth, someone talked over me. It was like watching a movie where I'd been badly edited out. So, Dad said eventually, turning to me with a forced smile. You've calmed down since the meeting, I hope. I've had time to think, I said carefully. Mom's shoulders sagged with relief. Good. We were worried you'd stay mad. We love you, honey. This doesn't change that. It changes something, I replied. But I do want to avoid misunderstandings. Dad relaxed, mistaking my calm for surrender. That's my boy. Practical. You get that this is what makes sense. I took a breath, heard Ray's voice in my head telling me not to tip my hand too soon, and smiled back. Exactly, I said. Which is why I asked Harris to schedule a meeting for all of us to go over the documents together next week. Just so everyone's on the same page. The silence that followed was thick enough to chew. Melissa's fork clinked against her plate. Mom's face went pale. Dad's jaw worked, like he was grinding his teeth around words he didn't want to say in front of the roast. We don't need a lawyer to explain our decisions, he finally muttered. Maybe not, I said softly. But I do. None of them realized I'd already stacked the deck against them. The day of the meeting, Harris's conference room felt smaller with all four of us inside. Dad sat at the head of the table, Melissa on his right, Mom on his left. I took the chair opposite Harris, my folder of copies neatly aligned with his. Thank you for coming, Harris began. Evan requested this meeting to clarify some questions he has about recent documents. I agreed it would be best if we addressed them together. Dad exhaled sharply. We've already gone over this with you, Harris. The estate plan is settled. With respect, Harris said, sliding a printout to the center of the table. These items involve Evan directly. It was the deed transfer first. The bolded line about my interest being extinguished practically glowed under the fluorescent lights. I never signed this, I said, voice steady. But someone signed my name. Melissa rolled her eyes. Oh my God, Evan. It's just a formality. You knew the house was going to me. Whether or not he knew, Harris interjected. If this signature is not his, there's a problem. Dad's face flushed. You're blowing this out of proportion. Evan agreed years ago that he didn't want to be tied to the property. I agreed to help, I corrected. Not to be written out. Harris produced the Ridgeview notice, the credit report entry, the original lease with my real signature. He lined them up like a timeline, each paper a small betrayal stacked on the next. Daniel, Linda, he said slowly. In light of this, I have to ask, who signed Evan's name on this transfer? No one spoke. Mom's eyes filled with tears. We thought it would be easier this way, she whispered. You're so independent. Melissa needed security. Did you sign my name? I asked her. She looked down at her hands and said nothing. The silence stretched until even the clock on the wall sounded loud, each tick another reminder of how long they'd been lying. Melissa shifted in her seat, suddenly less smug now that the word problem was hanging in the air beside signature and interest extinguished. In that suffocating silence, Dad's shoulders slumped like a man finally cornered. Dad finally opened his mouth and shattered whatever trust one had left. I signed it, Dad said. I signed your name. The words dropped between us like a brick. Daniel, Harris warned quietly. Dad barreled on. We knew you'd make everything complicated. We knew you'd argue about the house and the rental and the will. Melissa needed stability. You'd just pick everything apart. So you forged my consent? I asked, hearing my voice wobble. You took my name and used it like whiteout? It's not like that, Mom whispered. You weren't really losing anything. The house was always going to be Melissa's. You're good on your own, Evan. You always have been. That's because I had to be, I said. Harris cleared his throat. Legally speaking, this is very serious. At minimum, these documents are highly contestable. If Evan chooses, he could pursue. We're not dragging our family through court, Dad snapped. You already did, I said. The second you picked up the pen and decided I didn't deserve a say. The rest blurred. Harris talked about options, voiding the transfer, revising the will, documenting any agreements properly this time. Melissa hissed that I was ruining everything. Mom cried. Dad alternated between rage and sulky silence. By the time we left, nothing was resolved on paper. But something had shifted. Harris insisted on drafting a new agreement for Willow Lane with my explicit written consent, or lack of it, recorded properly. He also strongly recommended I get my own attorney. Outside in the parking lot, Mom tried to hug me. We can fix this, she said. We'll talk it through as a family. Please don't escalate. I stepped back. I didn't escalate anything. I just stopped pretending. On the drive home, my phone buzzed nonstop. Melissa calling me selfish, a cousin asking what happened, Ray sending a single text that said, proud of you. Remember your worth isn't on their balance sheet. I turned the phone face down on the passenger seat and drove in silence. That night, alone in my apartment, the adrenaline dumped out of my system and left behind a heavy ache that settled into my bones. I hadn't yet grasped how high the emotional bill would be. Fallout didn't arrive as one big explosion. It came as a steady series of smaller aftershocks. Mom started sending long texts about how families shouldn't let money come between them, carefully ignoring who had moved the money first. Dad refused to speak to me directly, relaying messages through her like we were in some medieval kingdom instead of 20 minutes apart in the same city. Melissa posted a photo on social media of her standing in front of the Willow Lane house with the caption, "Hard work pays off." I stared at it until the edges of my vision blurred, then finally hit block. At Harris's urging, I met with my own attorney, a woman named Torres who didn't know my parents and didn't care about anyone's feelings, including mine. She looked through the file, asked sharp questions, and laid out options. Contest the transfer formally, demand a fair share of the estate, or walk away with a documented release and airtight boundary. What do you want, Evan? She asked. Not what you think you're supposed to want. What actually lets you sleep at night? For the first time, I said it out loud. I don't want their house, I said. I don't want their rental. I want my name off anything they've touched without my permission. And I want them to never be able to do this to me again. Torres nodded. Then we put everything in writing. No more favors. No more vague promises. Alongside the legal work, I started therapy. My new therapist, Mara, didn't flinch when I described the fake signature, the will, the way being the responsible one, had become an excuse to give me nothing. You were parentified, she said. They treated your stability as a resource to exploit, not something to protect. Hearing it framed that way hurt and helped at the same time, like cleaning out a wound that had been festering for years. I started to notice how often I apologized for existing, how quickly I offered to help before anyone asked, how uncomfortable I felt when I wasn't earning my place in a room. For once, healing meant protecting myself instead of rescuing everyone else. It's been a year since the day my father admitted he signed my name like it was spare ink. Torres negotiated an agreement that felt like closure, if not justice. The forged transfer was voided. The will was revised, not to hand me a fortune, but to remove my name from any responsibilities I hadn't chosen. I signed that part myself, hands steady. Melissa kept the house and the rental, this time with legal paperwork that didn't pretend I'd blessed it. In exchange, my parents signed a separate document stating they would not open accounts or loans in my name, list me as guarantor, or alter any joint property without my written consent. It's amazing how radical "don't misuse your child's identity" looks once it's on letterhead. Our relationship is thin. I see them on major holidays at Ray's place, neutral territory with store-bought cookies and paper plates. Mom hugs me like something fragile. Dad mostly talks about sports and the weather, as if diving any deeper might drag us back into the conference room. Sometimes I drive past Willow Lane on my way home from work. Melissa's red SUV is in the driveway more often than not. The house looks fine. Mine, a small apartment with mismatched furniture, looks fine too. But when I unlock my own door, every bill on the table, every crooked picture frame feels like something I earned, not something I was grudgingly allowed. If you're watching this and recognizing your own family in mine, here's what I wish someone had told me sooner. Being the responsible one doesn't mean you owe them your silence, your credit score, or your future. You are allowed to ask questions, to demand clarity, to walk away from deals made over your head and signed with a version of you that never got to say no. Instead, I drove back to my little place, opened the windows, cooked myself dinner, and sat on the floor with Milo purring against my leg, realizing that peace, not property, was the inheritance I'd decided to claim.